equal rights for all people, especially African Americans. His life was taken because of his commitment and work to get those rights legalized. Dr. King was arrested 29 times, but he never gave up his nonviolent approach to demand equal rights. We celebrate to honor his commitment to equality for all people, but especially in America.
Who is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., born Michael King Jr., was an American Baptist minister and activist who became the most visible spokesman and leader in the American Civil Rights Movement. He is the son of a Baptist minister, a graduate of Morehouse College, and at 25 became pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. He believed in and taught a nonviolence approach to gaining freedom from abuse, segregation, and discrimination for African Americans, people of color, and women.
What's an activist and why would Dr. King become one? An activist is someone who gets involved, they identify a problem, and work to bring about change. That's exactly what Dr. King did. He saw that African Americans were being mistreated, and he led marches to secure African American rights to vote, labor rights, and other basic civil rights. He led the 1955 Montgomery Bus Boycott and later became the first president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and helped organize some of the nonviolent 1963 protests on Birmingham, Alabama. Dr. King assisted in coordination of the 1963 March on Washington, where he delivered his I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. The March on Washington had over 100,000 people participate.
Why is understanding the civil rights movement important? If the civil rights movement had not occurred, there would be no laws that give everyone the right to vote, to live where they choose, to go to the school of their choice, or to end discrimination in hiring. The Civil Rights Bill of 1964, which was signed in 1965, is one of the most important pieces of legislation in American history. Not only address the rights of people of color, but also women's rights. Women and people of color can exercise freedoms today that are only possible due to the civil rights movement.
Dr. King made over 2,500 speeches, many of which have become an inspiration to people everywhere. His speeches address civil rights and human rights. We often hear about his dream speech or mountaintop speech, but he was also a juror major for justice. May 1957, Washington, D.C., from Give Us the Ballot. Give us the ballot, and we will no longer have to worry the federal government about our basic rights. Give us the ballot, and we will no longer plead to the federal government for passage of an anti-lynching law. We will by the power of our vote write the law on the statute books of the South and bring an end to the dastardly acts of the hooded perpetrators of violence. Give us the ballot, and we will transform the salient misdeeds of bloodthirsty mobs into the calculated good deeds of orderly citizens. Give us the ballot, and we will fill our legislative halls with men of goodwill and send to the sacred halls of Congress men who will not sign a Southern manifesto because of their devotion to the manifesto of justice. Give us the ballot, and we will place judges on the benches of the South who will do justly and love mercy, and we will place at the head of the Southern states governors who have not felt only the tang of the human, but the glow of the divine. Give us the ballot, and we will quietly and non-violently, without rancor or bitterness, implement the Supreme Court's decision of May 17, 1954. In this juncture of our nation's history, there is an urgent need for dedicated and courageous leadership.
November 17, 1957, Montgomery, Alabama, loving your enemies. Now for the few moments left. Let us move from the partly how to, theoretically why. It's not only necessary to know how to go about loving your enemies, but also to go down to the question of why we should love our enemies. I think the first reason that we should love our enemies, and I think this was at the very center of Jesus' thinking, is this, that hate for hate only intensifies, that is this, of hate and evil in the universe. If I hit you and you hit me and I hit you back and you hit me and go on, you will see that goes to infinitum. It just never ends. Somewhere, somebody must have a little sense, and that's the strong person. The strong person is a person who can cut off the chain of hate, the chain of evil. And that's the tragedy of hate, that it doesn't cut it off. It only intensifies the essence of hate and evil in the universe. Somebody must have religion enough and morality enough to cut it off and inject within the very structure of the universe that the strong person and powerful element of love.
Faith is taking the first step, even when you can't see the whole staircase.
April 16, 1963, Birmingham, Alabama. Letter from a Birmingham jail. But more basically, I'm in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of ancient BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I'm cognizant of all interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in a network of mutuality tied to a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with a narrow provincial outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives within the United States can never feel like an outsider within its bounds.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
March 25th, 1965, Selma, Alabama. Our God is marching on. But today, as I stand before you and think back over that great march, I can say, as Sister Pollard, a 70-year-old Negro woman who lived in the community during the bus boycott, and one day she was asked while walking if she didn't want to ride. And when she answered no, the person said, "Well, aren't you tired?" And she said with her ungrammatical profundity, "My feet is tired, but my soul is rested." And in a real state this afternoon, we can say that our feet are tired, but our souls are rested. They told us we wouldn't get here, and there were those who said we will only get here over their dead bodies. But all the world knows today is that we are here, and we are standing before the forces of power in the state of Alabama saying, we ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. Now, it's not an accident that one of the great marches of American history should terminate in Montgomery, Alabama. Just 10 years ago, in this very city, a new philosophy was born of the Negro struggle. Montgomery was the first city in the South in which the entire Negro congregation, community, united and squarely faces age-old oppressors. Out of this struggle, more than bus desegregation was won. A new idea, more powerful than guns or clubs, was born. Negroes took it and carried it across the South in epic battles that electrified the nation and the world. Yet strangely, the climatic conflicts were always fought and won on Alabama soil. After Montgomery's heroic confrontations loomed up in Arkansas, Mississippi, Georgia, and elsewhere, but not until the colossus of segregation was challenged in Birmingham did the conscience of America begin to bleed. White America was profoundly aroused by Birmingham because it witnessed a whole community of Negroes facing terror and brutality with majestic scorn and heroic courage. And from the wells of the democratic spirit, the nation finally forced Congress to write legislation in the hope that it will eradicate the stain of Birmingham. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 gave Negroes some part of their rightful dignity, but without the vote, it was dignity without strength.
Darkness can't drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate can't drive out hate. Only love can do that.
December 10th, 1964, Oslo, Norway, the Nobel Peace Prize. Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I accept the Nobel Prize for Peace at a moment where 22 million Negroes of the United States of America are engaged in a creative battle to end the long night of racial justice. I accept this award on behalf of a civil rights movement which is moving with determination and a majestic scorn for risk and danger to establish a reign of freedom and a rule of justice. I am mindful that only yesterday in Birmingham, Alabama, our children crying out for brotherhood were answered with fire hoses, snarling dogs, and even death. I am mindful that only yesterday in Philadelphia, Mississippi, young people seeking to secure the right to vote were brutalized and murdered. And only yesterday, more than 40 houses of worship in the state of Mississippi alone were burned or bombed because they offered a sanctuary to those who would not accept segregation. I am mindful that debilitating and grinding poverty afflicts my people and chains them to the lowest rung of the economical ladder. Therefore, I must ask why this prize is awarded to a movement which is beleaguered and committed to unrelenting struggle.
April 9, 1967, the 3 dimensions of a complete life. When I was in Montgomery, Alabama, I went to a shoe shop quite often known as the Gordon Shoe Shop. And there was a fellow in there that used to shine my shoes. And it was just an experience to witness this fellow shining my shoes. He would get that rag, you know. He could bring music out of it. And I said to myself, this fellow has a PhD in shoe shining. That's right. But I'm saying to you this morning, my friends, even if it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, going out and sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep streets like Handel and Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Go ahead, sweep streets so well that all hosts of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well.
If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep on moving forward.